Okay, we're going to get started on this today. Looks like we might have a lighter than normal turnout, so we'll get through this in an hour, but we'll see how it turns out today. I think probably the next couple of these meetups into March and April are probably going to be really granular in information in terms of there will be some really good specifics that are put out there, but it might not all be really generally uh, necessary information. So if you show up for these, it's great. If ultimately you miss one or two, it's certainly going to be fine. And we are recording them, so I think we're recording them. So at that point, you can pick up on them. And my guess is that the numbers will probably trend down as more and more people start to listen to the recordings instead of show up live for them. Um, Today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on a couple of things that have recently occurred, and then we're going to talk a little bit about April and what's going on there, and then of course we'll kick it over to you guys for Q&A. The key things that we're going to talk about to begin with that have been happening are primarily related to the new Grafana and incentives. And since it just happened, I will ask Master to talk a little bit about the duck DNS situation and what's going on there. What I do want to say about dynamic DNS is that we have put it out there as a recommendation or a guidance. I know it's certainly easier for folks to run with a DDNS service because ultimately then you can just sort of set and forget. But at the end of the day, last year, the project we forked from, which was Saya, had a DDoS attack of some sort. It was unclear what was really going on there because looks like somebody just got the word out to show up because a whole bunch of people are just now diving in. But anyway, I say that with a little tongue in cheek because it didn't feel right. It felt almost like almost felt like an orchestrated attack. And, with those guys, there's just nothing is ever what it seems. So, we just didn't even, really pay much attention to the underlying part of it. It didn't take their whole network down, for one. It was seemingly very targeted. But it did provide a very clear sort of view on what can happen on these kinds of networks, specifically to the renter host protocol under a DDoS attack. And the one key overriding thing that we learned from the attack is that there ain't a lot you can do about it, right? If it's coming, it's coming. At some point, we'll start looking into other sort of, probably closer to centralized type services to help mitigate some of this stuff. We might even, be able to work some of it in directly into our cloud. But at the end of the day, the one thing that was very clear was if you were sitting there on a dynamic DNS service, there wasn't anything you could do because that address was the one they were essentially attacking. And so, you didn't have really much ability to make any changes there that would essentially bring your network back online quickly. What people were reporting is that if they were on an IP only, they could reboot the modem and have the modem pick up a new IP from the service provider, or they could contact their ISP and get a new IP address. And then ultimately the attack, would cease because it wasn't targeting the new address. And there were some people, so what the profile of the attack looked like was, so look, if this was the only thing on your network, your host, then, wouldn't it be that big of a deal? But for almost everybody that was under attack, that was just one item on their network. And so everything behind it was getting jammed up. So if they end up targeting our network and you have a whole bunch of other things going on your network and you get hit, you could end up watching a whole bunch of stuff you need to be able to access the internet with being, shut off or cut off. So that's why we kind of are recommending people go with IP only. And it makes for a much cleaner P2P address list anyway. We'll be able to do a lot more with it. But then the problem occurs that, if there's some changes and so forth, you have to be there to do the reannounces and you have to kind of get that out of the way. Well, the examiners do reannounces automatically. This latest announcement from Adramir on his host manager, which looks pretty exciting, also has introduced an auto reannounce for IP addresses. So pretty soon, I think it's going to be a situation where everybody ought to just run IPs and not be using dynamic DNS services. With that in place, I think I'm going to turn it over to Henry for a couple of minutes to describe what it looked like to us happened on the Duck DNS service, and just maybe to talk a little bit about the Duck DNS situation and how it presented and what the fallout from it was. So take it away, Henry.
Thanks, Faust. So yeah, it's kind of covered there. We did notice yesterday that a good number of Duck DNS providers, a lot of which had pretty stellar uptime, so we know it's unusual when a good number of them go offline. We started seeing some weird things where our scanners were like taking 5 to 10 seconds to scan a host that normally is less than half a second. Like DNS resolutions just weren't going through, or we were seeing like temporary unavailability. So just throwing lots of errors that we weren't normally seeing. This did only seem to affect kind of a subset of the overall providers. Even the ones that were using Duck DNS, even seemingly in the same region, sometimes weren't affected, sometimes were. So we don't really know what was going on in their house, and ultimately we don't have a lot of visibility into the internals of how Duck DNS works, and it is a free service, of course, so you can't be too upset when it every once in a while acts a little strange, but it is something that we're definitely keeping an eye on, and we're trying to figure out how we can monitor that kind of situation better, what it looks like when DNS resolution starts to act a little funny, and of course alternatives for how can we be less dependent on any one kind of source or like that kind of thing. So some people have looked into like other DNS services. It would probably be overall a good thing if we were spread out across several, but ultimately the end game, as we kind of covered, is to just use your plain IP, and then just reannounce whenever that IP changes. So we shouldn't be too far off that being something that everyone can do pretty easily. So just kind of teething issues at this point, but hopefully the Duck DNS troubles are behind us, but we are keeping an eye on it. So yeah, stay tuned on what we kind of advise in that situation as it moves forward. Overall with Grafana and the situation there, probably a lot of you noticed a couple days ago, got a bit of a new look. So this was a change that we had kind of wanted to make for a little while because we were getting a lot of people who were like understandably reading the panels, and it was probably our fault that we put a little seemingly too much emphasis on certain points of the data that weren't as important as it may have seemed, and that kind of thing. So we totally kind of revised it, kind of got rid of some of the information that really didn't matter. So things like scan times, it really doesn't matter whether it resolves in 800 milliseconds or 80. But that used to be something that was presented in big letters near the top. So we kind of got rid of that kind of thing. It was overall a new look. Hopefully is much more sensible as to what information is important, when there is action required, where it's needed, and specifically what steps you should take even. So that was one of the things that I spent a couple days working on, was a smarter issues panel. So this should be able to use the data from your scans and be able to kind of interpret and look for if there's any obvious misconfigurations. So maybe you announced, but then for whatever reason you restarted and your wallet wasn't able to automatically unlock, then your provider will report online. However, you won't be able to accept any contracts, which is no good. So it'll now notify you for that kind of thing. So yeah, overall working towards kind of having one place that you can look to see the status of your provider, if there's any intervention that's required, get information as to how it's performing. That's ultimately the end goal. for the provider dashboards. However, the future of the provider dashboards isn't necessarily tied to Grafana. And ultimately, it's probably no secret that we are looking toward moving off of Grafana and toward kind of a full dedicated service that'll carry us from the 3,000 providers we're at today to 30,000 and 300,000 in the future. If we're still using Grafana 3 months from now, then we did something wrong, because it's good at what it does, but ultimately it's not the service that we're going to have. When there's 30,000 providers out in the wild. So that's something that we're kind of whiteboarding internally at this point. What does the next evolution of the dashboard look like? How can we potentially open the APIs so that people can create kind of their own dashboards and have some visibility to some of the data that we collect? That's totally something that we would like to be able to support, have a bit of a third-party ecosystem for people putting together their own tools or their own looks. That's totally something we're interested in. So we'd like to be able to do that. I'd say that's all kind of concerning the Duck DNS and the Grafana situation at this point. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, Ken. So do we want to talk about the relayer stuff?
I want to ask you a couple of questions, have you expound on them a little bit in terms of the Grafana stuff. And some of this, it'll actually be me learning as much as the audience here too, because I haven't had a chance to really chat with you about it in depth. But a couple of things that we did on some of the new provider details. So, just so that we're for this period of time before we actually get our own, thing put in place, so that you all really understand what is being presented here and why. Um, the one thing that we really focused early on was getting this troubleshooter slash capability put into place. There is a troubleshooter out there, but it goes up and goes down, and we're not really clear on what exactly is going on there. So this new provider status panel, what are folks going to expect to be able to find in that provider status panel uh, going forward over the next 90 days? What should they expect to find there on a when things are going well for them, and what should they expect to find there when things are not going well?
So the provider status panel, as it is today, it looks for it looks through the stats that are reported from your particular instance of SPD, or the SC prime daemon. So that reports all sorts of things about the status of the provider, and we kind of look through it and look through your settings to see if your settings are kind of in line with incentives or not, or if like your collateral is way lower than your storage price, which obviously isn't right, and would have issues with forming contracts. It covers some really basic stuff like are we even able to connect to your provider or not? So any sort of kind of issues of is your provider available? Is it seemingly working properly? That's all reported in the provider status panel. The one thing that we would really like to be able to do that's a little more complicated to get working is regarding once we've formed a contract, there are seemingly some providers out there that have some issue around SPD actually being able to kind of locate and utilize and write to the storage folders. So what this might look like to you as a provider is if you've had your provider online for a long time and the amount of storage usage hasn't changed in like a week or two, or maybe even longer, or it just never got any storage to begin with after like several weeks of being online. That would typically be indicative of a problem of actually being able to write to and utilize your storage folders. And that's something that we know that the relayers or whoever's forming the contract and uploading to you, they actually get an error in their log when they go to upload to you that says that that provider isn't able to write, or it isn't able to accept storage. But that's only reported kind of in those logs, and that's something that we would really like to be able to have visibility to in the provider status panel, because that's kind of an issue that it's not super prevalent. It only seems to affect like a pretty small subset of the overall providers. But those people are out there, and it's not very obvious what's misconfigured at first, and it's not something that you'd be able to tell just by looking through the stats reported. It's a pretty narrow issue, but it is one that we're aware of, and we're hoping to really kind of cover all of our bases and any problem that any provider might have at pretty much any point, ultimately be able to measure it and locate it and report that in the status panel. That's the vision.
Okay, and then I want to just ask you about this top, and I'm actually give me a couple of quick seconds here because I want to I'm trying to find actually a couple of indicative examples because I want to make sure I get the verbiage correctly, and so I need to find somebody who's below 95%. Here we go, but above 70. Here's one right here. Perfect. All right. So this is a little unclear to me about what's going on, and so I'd like to have you just sort of illuminate exactly what the things mean for everybody who are not really totally clear. And if you're not clear about what we're even talking about, you can go to the events discussion panel. Can you all hear me? It sounds somebody is asking me to speak up. Type in the events channel if you're having problems hearing me. Yeah, so it's just Jeff causing problems again. All right, so um, anyway, what I want to do is go to this. If you go to the events channel, you'll see a screen that I posted in there, which is the new Grafana panel for the details page from everybody. And if you take a look at that, what you'll see is um, the biggest thing that you'll notice that's a change is this top headline piece. And the part I want to talk about real quickly is the second and third items over, which is uptime and incentives rate. And since, these kinds of things aren't always, you know, communicated in a way that everybody gets them at the same time. People pick them up in different places. I'm going to just go over this really quickly before asking Henry to tell us a little bit about the two pieces. But the way the incentives work, and let's because we're going to talk a little bit about incentives throughout this call, is that essentially with incentives. So first of all, remember what incentives are. Your real reason for being here is not incentives, even though some of these YouTubes and everybody would sort of make it seem like that is the case. It's really not the case. You're here for the rent, right? It's the renter host protocol. And the deal is you're here to get the actual storage rent. You want people to rent the storage on your drives and get paid on it off of a decentralized smart contracting payment channel where there's no, anybody in between you and the actual customer that's renting the data. So that's really where the primary amount of funding and monetization that you're going to see out of this thing. Incentives are this second layer of frosting that a private corporation called SCP Corp, us, we just happen to be developing both the blockchain open source stuff and the client side stuff at the same time, are providing because we want to see providers look a certain way, right? We want them to be performant to a certain degree. We want them to be available in certain locations. We want them to have certain kinds of, ruggedness and availability and durability. So we've set a number of criteria and we've just now started to deliver on a basic incentives premise, which is uptime. And I say just now, actually, we've been doing that now for 3 years. But we have identified several additional incentives that we're going to be rolling out this year. So uptime is the first one. It's the biggest one, and everything else will be based on uptime. And the way we have it currently set up is that you have to kind of hit a minimum, right? If you don't hit a minimum of 85%, I think it's 85. It's either 80 or 85, but it's one of those numbers. Um, then you don't get any incentives. And the deal is that that sort of indicates that anything below like 85% means you're just not durable enough. You're not available enough for us to understand or believe that we're not going to see a lot of missed storage proofs, churn, hosts marked as bad, ultimately us having to create new data downloads, sharding, encryption again, re-uploading to new providers. You're going to cost us money. So we're not going to give you money if you're going to cost us money, right? So once you get to that place where you can earn some incentives, then it's a gradated scale as you go up from there to 95%. And it's like, there's a zero point 0.01 gradation as it keeps moving up between 85 and 95. And the deal is that the closer you get to 95, the closer you get to 100% incentives. And then once you hit 95%, then you get 100% of the incentives that are available for your provider instance. And anything above 95% doesn't get you any bonus points. So, one of the things we were really getting frustrated by is a bunch of you people saying, geez, I dropped from 98.7 down to 98.6. I'm really bummed out. That's just not a thing, right? Now, at the same time, if you're at 958, you definitely want to keep an eye on it, because if something happens and you drop down to 948, suddenly now you're going to be getting less incentives. But it's not like you're going to go from 100 to 0. It's like you're going to go from 100 down to 95 or some number like that. So it's a gradation, and it's built to sort of keep you in that 95 range and really focus high on that 95 range. If you stay in 95, we can count on there being very few missed storage proofs and ultimately very little in the way of churn and extra expenses. So, Henry, why don't you tell us a little bit about the color schema there, first of all, and then this incentives rate is now set showing. So like right now I'm looking at one that says 89%, but it says none. So I think that might be an issue right now that we need to tweak or tune or whatever. And then I have one that's showing 10% none. And then I have one that's green and it's showing incentives rate full. So can you describe the color schema and, what this is supposed to look like?
Sure. So in general, kind of keeping with the kind of stoplight color scheme. So green obviously means you're good, everything's working as expected, you're making the full qualification. And then kind of in the middle, there's yellow, which refers to, there might be something not operating fully, but in general, no intervention is required. Like things are kind of going okay, and they're getting toward being green. And then red indicates that there is an actual issue. There's a misconfiguration. Either you're offline or you don't, like, your pricing might be outside of incentives ranges, or you're not accepting contracts. Like there is something actually wrong with your provider. Now, what we have kind of experienced, and this is compounded by some of the duck DNS issues over the last little bit, is that if there are providers that go from online to offline and then back to online, like that kind of thing, in a short period, we've kind of realized that when we run the numbers for your incentives qualification, that is slightly out of sync with when the actual scanners run. So some of the eagle-eyed people out there might notice they might just happen to look at their panel in the window where the scanner has just found them to be online, but the incentives qualification hasn't quite run yet. Both of them run regularly, but if they're a little bit out of sync, then you might happen to look at the dashboard in the window where it's telling you, oh, you're green, you're online, but it's still saying that you have no incentives, and that's because the last time that calculation was run, you were offline at the time. But once again, these all run regularly, so that should never be an issue for more than like 5 or 10 minutes at a time. And we're working to kind of synchronize up those things much better. So there should ideally never be a situation where the information seems to conflict, even though that is a bit of a bug right now. where there might be a 5 to 10 minute window uh, where that might be a thing. And once again, that's just seemingly worsened by the fact that there's those duck DNS issues that are making some providers kind of go from online to offline to back to online. Uh, and it can seem kind of confusing. So yeah, we're working on that. And but yeah, there should be no real fundamental issues, and the information should never be more than like 10 minutes out of date or so.
So the way you should be kind of using this, and I just posted another one in the channel, and this one is one that has incentives rate at none, even though the uptime is 89%. But then the way you should be using it is, so you start up there and you look at that, and if in a vacuum that would essentially say, well, there's something wrong because I'm within the incentives window, but I'm getting none. So then you go down and you look at the provider status section, and that's turned now from a blue into a red to tell us that there's some issue that needs to be resolved. And then if you look down through the list of issues, in this case, the one says not accepting contracts. So it's been turned into a passive provider for some reason. Maybe it's because the individual running it decided to do it passive because they're actually, moving, or they're doing something else like that, or adding storage or whatever. Or they might not know that it turned passive, and now this will tell them that they have to do something. In this case, it would be re-announcing to turn that back to true. Or if it wasn't anything in the issues, then as Henry said, you would look down then below further at the scan histories and then see exactly what's going on with the scanners, because it might be the thing with us being the issue. And then if it's us, then you just need to wait a little bit and go forward. Now, I want to talk just real briefly about the scan periods and something that Rhinus wrote earlier about this. You know, Rhinus has been, more frustrated about all this stuff than anybody because, he's kind of been the guy driving the Grafana stuff behind the scenes. And a lot of it has been a really heavy learning curve in the database. He's done just an enormously great job of picking up a lot of really uh, important SQL to make this thing work correctly. And I think we really have a robust system behind us, but we've really kind of got, hit with all the stuff in advance of product launch that is really going to help us to deliver an at scale solution. And so the last several weeks, as you know, he's been working on what are called materialized views, which is a way to actually deliver the databases without all you guys continuously hammering the databases. So the one thing that he's frustrated by now a little bit is this thing I led with, which is that incentives are essentially a gratuity. They're a perk. They're not a liability, right? They're not something we owe anybody. And I think this has created a lot of challenges for everybody in this project that's come aboard in the last 2 months, because they see the incentives and they sort of think, that this is something that's just, blockchain driven and owed to anybody who stands up a deal. And it's just not. It's just largesse from the corporation to build a network. And so when we talk about incentives, the real big issue with incentives, the real biggest challenge that we have with incentives is these scanners. Because what happens is the scanners have to go out and they have to bang on everybody all the time around the clock and ensure you're up and operational. So right out of the gate, you understand we can't just run one scanner, right? If we run one scanner, any kind of internet outage between us and you is going to cause a problem, right? You could be up and servicing the network just fine, and we're not going to see you. And the way it works inside the runner host protocol, by the way, just to give you a little sort of peek, because a lot of you don't really, have this background and you aren't going to probably pick it up, is that there's a renter module inside everybody's SPD. And if you ran the renter module at the same time you were running your host, what you would be able to find is you'd be able to run a couple of commands to see what the rest of the network looks like. So you'd have your own scanner, essentially, right? You'd be able to see what the network looked like from your vantage point, right? And you might see a bunch of providers that have a bunch of failed scans, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were down. That just means that between you and them, there was some kind of, outage or blockage or something that caused that to go down. It's the same way with our scanners. Our scanners are going to do the same thing. So what we have to do is we've got to get at least, 3 scanners out there working on it. But that generates an enormous amount of data ingest for us. Can you imagine what it's going to look like when we have 30, 100, 500,000, providers out there, and we're pulling these scans every 20 minutes or every hour or whatever it is. So it's a real big puzzle. And ultimately, I think what's going to end up happening is the relayers themselves are actually going to be the scanners of purpose or of record, and those will actually be generating performance and availability data that we feed into a incentives pool that will allow us to do a much better job of being able to calculate. What comes up from time to time with all you guys is that, well, I wasn't really down, but the scanner hit me, and then, it didn't scan me again for another 2 hours. And it's like, what, am I supposed to lose 2 hours because the scanner didn't, come around? Well, what we've done there is we've made it so that the most you can ever end up losing in that kind of a situation is 20 minutes, because when the scanner comes back around, if it's missed you and it didn't have a chance to find out if you were, up that entire hour, it's just going to go ahead and give you the 40 minutes at the beginning and only dock you for the 20 minutes at the end. Now, it might be that you were only down 10 minutes, so you could actually lose a little bit there. But in most cases, it's going to be pretty close to accurate. And so we are kind of doing things behind the scenes that will make the incentives more and more reliable and more, accurate going forward. I think where this all really changes as we kind of really get into it is the new incentives that we want to roll out, the continuous time and service, and the other new incentives, locate geolocations, and some of these other things that we definitely want to reward on. Those will begin to take more precedence and priority, and ultimately this whole uptime thing will sort of not fade into the background, but it won't be quite as important as it currently is to everybody that's in there. So okay, so let me come back to the theater here, because I've actually been out doing some other things while we've been in here. Okay, so we're going to transition. If you have any questions about the incentives and so forth, just hold them. We'll get to you when we do the Q&A part. What we're going to move into now is we're going to talk a little bit about the relayer and what we're currently seeing there. And I want to preface this. I'm going to give you a little couple-minute lead in, and then I'm going to turn it over to Henry again. And by the way, I'm committed now in making sure that these sessions have the right, individuals come and provide information that can really help you guys be better providers and be a better network. So if there are people that you want to hear from, or people that you think would be good to have in the meetup sessions, definitely ping me somewhere in the Discord and let me know what you think. And if it's a stupid idea, I'll just tell you. But if it's a good idea, I'll also tell you. So you can always get the straight skinny from me. The relayer is a really cool thing, and it's really our raison d'etre. It's the reason why we're here. And what people don't really know that are new to this thing is sort of how we all came about. And I think it's pretty important to always continue to revisit this. So, a lot of us started out on another project, and from my perspective, I don't even much care about crypto. I really don't. I don't come to this thing with this whole notion of decentralization being the holy grail, be all end all. I just don't even care about it. Because at the end of the day, I'm a networking guy, and my background has always been watching as things moved out from sort of this client server model out to this distributed model. And that was, I lived through the whole internet rollout, watched how that all sort of transitioned and grew and developed. And I see us now on another one of those waves. And I do think the wave probably does end up at the very sort of end game being a fairly decently decentralized environment. I do think a lot of self-serve is on the way. But I think that getting there is going to be the real key. And I don't think it's going to happen like a light switch. I think it'll happen, over time. And so, our idea is as SCP Corp out there as a sales and marketing entity, we're going to be out there, offering storage on a cloud service provider that people are going to be able to use the way they currently use something like AWS or Azure or Google, with maybe just a couple of minor type changes or differences. And so they pay the way they normally do, credit card, PO, whatever, and ultimately they access it via URL change or whatever. but at the end of the day, they don't have to buy or store Bitcoin or SCP coins or anything like that. That all happens transparently underneath. Over time, we have the ability to open that up. And where that all comes to play is in this relayer. So a lot of us got started out over on the Saya project in 2017 or before. And the whole notion there for me was I was mining Ethereum and I saw this thing called Saya that you can double mine with it, did that, and then started really looking into it. Then I really kind of got an idea, looked into Zach, looked into a bunch of other stuff. Then I started understanding about scams and some of the things that were going on. Made a bunch of money off ZCL, for instance, which was a fork of ZEC, which is a fork of something else, So, really kind of got that whole understanding of how crypto is and just really grew very jaded by it all. But I kept understanding that decentralized storage, distributed storage, was something where it really did make sense. And the problem is that the people that were running the Saya project really had some pretty interesting ideas, but those ideas were mainly about dividing communities and pushing people out who had visions that were different from their founders. Now, maybe some people are saying that right now here about us. I don't know. I think they need to give us a little bit of time and patience to see how it all plays out. But over there, what happened is a bunch of people got kind of forked off against their will after spending a lot of money on equipment. And the deal was those are ASIC miners, and we saw an opportunity to pick it up. We didn't know what we were going to do at first, but we did know that we wanted to provide this kind of a service. So when we started looking into it, the original thought was, well, we're just going to write a layer 2 application on top of the protocol because the protocol seems pretty solid. Well, once we really started digging into the protocol, we realized the protocol really isn't very solid and that we did have a lot of work to do at layer 1 level and also in that payment channel, which is really kind of a layer 1.5. It's not really layer 2. It's not really layer 1. It's kind of in the middle. So we had a lot of work to do there, and we still have a lot more work to do there for accounting and for showing you where the money's moving and how it's moving and so forth. So the whole idea was we were going to write this stack on top, and what ended up happening was we got caught up in all that, redo and rework and all that, and that took us out a year and a half. And then ultimately we did start delivering our product, and then we realized our product needed a lot more than we thought it was going to need. So that's been the last year, and the last year's been really productive. I mean, we got a lot done, but it has pushed things off. It has pushed things out. And now we're kind of in a place where I'm telling everybody it's put up or shut up. I mean, we really have to deliver a product now. And look, it's not going to be Amazon right out of the gate, but it's going to be pretty good. And it's all based around this piece called the relayer. And what the relayer is, if you guys are the hosts in the renter host protocol, then the relayer is the renter. Okay, and we've changed those terminologies. We don't call them hosts, we call them storage providers. But the protocol underneath it is the renter host protocol, and you are the host. So we are the renters in this relayer. And we talked a little bit about last week on the relayer being this tool that essentially gets installed somewhere between the customer and the network. And then the relayer does a whole bunch of things. First of all, it has a database behind it. It's got a caching facility built into it. Then it's got all the tools to handle encryption and sharding and actually to do things like ACL permissioning and versioning and lifecycling. We haven't introduced any of that stuff yet, but it's got all that. It's also got all the ability to tie in the S3 overlay, which we currently use Minio as our front end for that, and our administrative screens for that. So we do have some ability right out of the gate for accounts and account-based access and groups and stuff like that. But a lot of that hasn't been exposed yet. We're still in that place where all of that's going to be sort of manifested and abstracted by our front end folks. We're looking for front-end folks, so if you're somebody who's really good, in the middle with various frameworks, React, Angular, if you're a JavaScripter extraordinaire, we definitely would like to hear from you. We have some web development that needs to be done. I keep getting hit almost seemingly weekly on how shitty our websites are. And yeah, we get it over and over and over. If you're somebody who's really good at that, maybe you're a designer and you think you have something to offer, definitely hit us up, because we now have some funding to put out to that stuff. But anyway, the deal then with the relayer is, this is a piece that has to sit between you and between our customer and the network. And right now, if you go to Amazon, you don't have that, right? That piece doesn't exist. You just bang a URL and upload data. Because with Amazon, you're uploading to a data center and you're just sending up one full copy to a data center. And then once that data is uploaded, then it gets replicated off to 2 additional data centers. And then they do sharding internally inside these data centers in order to get their 11 nines, which I still consider to be a bullshit number for them, because it doesn't really work. They really are just 2 replicated copies for 90% of the data on their network. In our case, right out of the gate, just having erasure coding and sending off to 40, 60, 80 hosts is by far more robust than any Amazon AWS replication strategy. But to get there, you've got to sliver up the data. You've got to encrypt it in that place. And because the way the network operates, and you have to parallelize it and send it all up, there has to be some caching that goes on there. It has to have some place to sort of hold it all as it's getting ready to send it all up to the network. And then, as I said, it has that database, so it has to hold all of this key pair metadata, which is what? It's essentially a map that tells you where everything is stored. Because look, if you're taking a data set and you're sending it off to 80 different providers on the network, if somebody down in accounting wants to download a spreadsheet, they've got to know where all those 80 providers are, right, in order to rebuild the data. So they bang that database. The database says, this is where they all are at. If you want to go download it, this is where I'm going to have to go grab them from. And then it starts looking at it like a torrent, actually, and it pulls from the 10 fastest or 15 or 20 or whatever the erasure coding number is, and then it downloads them. So we need that tool in the middle, and that tool in the middle is really, really extensive, and it's really powerful, and it's really been a kind of a joy to build and see how it goes. And we're now at a place where I really, truly feel like we're about ready to spring it on the world. So April, I think, is going to be really wonderful. So what happened was, and I know my long-winded ways just really drag these out, but I do need to get through this. So what happened was in December, we were all kind of ready for this January 18th thing. And, we didn't really know what was going to happen. We didn't understand what could happen. Well, you all know what happened. What happened was these YouTubers showed up, they did their thing, and then you all showed up. So, here we were doing our stuff. We were just grinding along. We were product development. We were good to go. And we all had our jobs. And then all of a sudden, you guys all showed up. Everything went nuts. We started selling Examiners like they were going out of style. And essentially, like I said, been telling people, I finally took a day off yesterday. And the only reason I took a day off is because I got boosted for COVID and got sick for a whole day. And I haven't had a day off since like June. And it's because of all of this growth in our community and this craziness. Well, that led us to this place where on, January 12th or so, I started asking the dudes to tell us where we were with relayer provisioning for customers, because I have a handful of about 15 or 20 potential customers who want to do trials right now and load your instances with data. But I had to thumbs down it. I had to say, no, this ain't going to work. This is going to be too hard. These guys are going to look at this. They're going to say, not ready for prime time, because it was all just a Dockerized, installation routine. And you ran into a bunch of question marks right out of the gate. And there was no real min-max recommended config. There was no real, how do I set it up? There was no real performance benchmarking. There was nothing. We just hadn't done the work. And it was mostly because in December, we were fighting the fire of a gigantic community growth, and nobody really was able to do their thing. And it was worse because with Rhinus and Jay and Chris, actually, who came aboard then at that period, it was worse because the network got blown up. Right? So we had so many fires we were just fighting. So that's why you didn't get a whole bunch of data on January 18th. What we've been doing since then is we've been building specialized relayer testing matrices that allow us to actually determine what sort of the top and bottom is. And the beauty of that is the top has been insanely high. We've been able to push data at rates that are just crazy high. And so we've been able to really now sort of start to bound this in on what it takes to run a relayer. We also are talking right now to an individual who's going to perhaps help us on the front end in building out a pretty basic application to control relayers and to set them up so that when we do get to April, that the idea of pushing a relayer into place in an organization is really a very simplistic proposition, doesn't take long. So I'm going to turn over to Henry again, and I'm going to start with a question. So we got into this thing where Jay began the setup of what we talked about last week, which was, what is the top, what is the bottom, how fast can we go, what are the things. Talk a little bit about workers versus parity versus data, and what a typical relayer today really ought to look like for the 80% of customers that are out there.
Yeah, so talking about like the erasure code settings, so that would be like the number of data shards that you want, the parity shards. These are all internal settings to the relayer. They're like fully customizable by the end user to give like fine-tuned control over obviously the erasure code settings, so how redundant you need the information to be. But also there are some settings like upload workers, and it's not very intuitive necessarily what that means. So we'll get into it. And then ultimately, obviously the settings that you choose have kind of implications on what kind of hardware requirements will you need. If you have a certain number that you want to hit as far as performance goes, what kind of settings would you want recommended? So these are all kind of the questions we've been chewing on. But we're getting a pretty good sense now. So I'll start with the data num and the parity num. So that's pretty simple. Pretty simple if you know how erasure codes work, which is obviously not a given, because if you've ever looked into how they actually work, you're going to just close the tab after 30 seconds because it hurts your brain. And they're really not intuitive how they actually work if you get into the math. But the gist of it is that you pick a certain number of shards that you want to represent the actual raw data for either your file that you're uploading. And then from that, it produces something called parity shards. And you can kind of think of these as shards that kind of sit in between your data shards and kind of have some overlap on each side, with the idea of if you have a missing data shard, but you have enough parity shards, there's enough kind of overlap in the data that you can piece together what that data shard should have been. So that's kind of how the redundancy fundamentally works. But then how the relayer actually goes about kind of creating these shards from your files and uploading them. So the relayer bites off kind of shards of size 4 megabytes out of your file at a time, with the idea of if you have, say, 30 data shards and it's 4 megabyte chunks, which is kind of fixed, then it's biting off 120 megs out of your file at a time. These chunks are then kind of extrapolated to make the parity shards. Those are all encrypted and then sent out to the network. And all of that, all of those steps is done by one worker. So you can kind of think of a worker as how parallelized or how concurrent the relayer is. So there's some nuances here. So don't be too afraid if there's kind of a lot going on, because there is. But it's really powerful, kind of how we've put this together. And because the number of upload workers can be almost any number you want, then this is how we reach incredible parallelism. Because if you have like 10 upload workers, then all of a sudden, that could represent potentially 1,000 or more live connections being maintained on your box at a time. So each upload worker would be uploading to potentially 80, 100 or more different providers. So you could have 10 of them, you could have 20, 30. yeah, the upper end is pretty high if you can feed it, obviously. So there are some kind of compute requirements. So one of the things we've kind of figured out, performance starts to degrade if you go beyond your core count as far as the upload workers go. So if you have 16 core CPU, you should probably not go above 16 upload workers. Um, but that can still be a pretty immense number. I mean, you could be uploading to like 800 different providers at one time. And really, at that point, the bottleneck starts to be like how fast can your system keep up? So since there's so many different shards being worked on all at the same time, uh, the disk requirements start to actually be pretty high. So the IOPS starts to push like 1,000 or more. So at that point, you will want an SSD. And your network, I mean, at that point, you like if you're doing 16 upload workers or more, you probably want more than gigabit. I mean, we're talking like 3 gigabit, 5 gigabit to really be pushing data out there. But obviously, that's not going to be everyone's config. So we are kind of closing in on some recommended configs as kind of a floor. So I'd say as kind of a floor recommendation. So this is something where it'll still be pretty impressive. It'll be worthwhile, but you're not necessarily uh, breaking breaking any records. I'd say probably 6 to 8 cores and 16 to 32 gigs of RAM would be pretty good to satisfy about a 1 gig line. But if you have more hardware available, so if you have 16 plus cores, if you have like 32 or 64 plus gigs of RAM, then you're really in a position where if you can get the upload, if you can get the networking for it, if you can get 3 gigs, 5 gigs, or beyond, you can really be breaking new ground, and that's where we're having really fun with the testing of finding out if you have a 64 core box and you have 128 gigs of RAM and you have 10 gig networking. How far can you push it? And I'm sure Ken isn't appreciating some of the bills we're racking up, but we're having a blast seeing kind of how much concurrency we can get, how much throughput. Yeah, it's really pretty awesome. I'm excited, and we're diving into we're diving into some opportunities as well for areas to tune. I mean, we're diving into like TCP packet tuning because we're forming like thousands of concurrent connections at a time, and it turns out that if you start going to those places, there's room for performance tuning if you really dive into some of the low level stuff. So we're exploring lots of different areas. But yeah, we're really excited by the potential that's there, and you don't even need absurd compute requirements or anything in order to hit high levels of performance. But if you can do it, it's certainly there.
Cool. So what'll end up probably happening at launch in April for us, and it actually will happen in advance of that, is we will likely set up a cloud-based relayer infra at our headquarters, as we have had for some time, uh, for the mom and pop type shops, for the really small companies that want to try out our thing. We'll go ahead and we'll just manifest that for them. Won't be a great scenario for them, by the way, because it'll essentially mean that they'll have to upload all their stuff to us. It'll be under our control. It will then get encrypted and sharded and sent out to the network. So it'll have 2 hops, and ultimately, probably won't be the customer that we're going to be targeting. But the next layer up is going to be where the customers look at these min recommended configs that Henry's talking about and actually instantiate them themselves on site, on prem, where they run a VM or, set up a piece of hardware or whatever, and then they run it, and maybe it services 10 to 100 seats or something along those lines. And ultimately, that level of customer gets sort of taken care of. They're trading out Amazon's heavy duty cost infrastructure for a little bit of additional management work that they have to do on their end, and perhaps adding in a bit of hardware if they need to, so that they can ultimately get the cost disintermediation that we bring to the table. The next layer is something that you people might be interested in, especially the ones of you that are running, multiple provider instance farms and so forth. If you're building data center type infrastructures, you might be interested in this next piece. So we've talked about this before, about partners potentially running relayers on command for customers. So let's say you already have a relationship with a number of customers for some reason. Maybe you're providing data center services for other kinds of applications and utilities. The ability will exist, and we're starting to work on the API development and perhaps even moving into SDK development for it. But the whole notion being that you can wrap in this capability to spin up relayers on command in some sort of data center that you've provisioned and you have configured. And that's, a situation where you might have customers that already trust you, but they don't want to be running relayers because they're mom and pops, or they just don't want to run the stuff and they already trust you to do it anyway. Maybe they get other services from you like Office 365 or whatever. And so what ends up happening is they spin up relayers at will, and you just swap out a URL on your end, do a hop to them, and assumably they're in your neighborhood, right? They're somewhere in your geographic region, so that there's a lower latency there and perhaps not as much bandwidth cost. And then ultimately then they go out to the network. So if you're somebody that is doing that and you have an interest in that, you definitely want to contact us to become part of the partners program, because you will have the ability to impact where data flows to, and also take a cut of it on the front end by providing that relayer capability. So the relayer really is the game changer here. It's really the thing that we will be launching primarily in April as we go forward in terms of XNS net services. That's the piece that's been under the development, and we think we're finally about ready to go ahead and launch. So I thought it was useful to kind of bring that out today. We do have it now in a place where I think I can start letting some of these trialers onto the net. So I think that you'll start seeing more data, and it'll be a gradation that as we get into April, you'll probably start seeing it slowly tip upwards into a bit of a hockey stick. And then hopefully after April, as we really start going, gangbusters into the summer, the data will really start to flow if our sales efforts, pan out and we do the work that we say we're going to do. All right, I want to move on to a couple of quick things. One, I just want to note this in the events discussion channel, Ian, otherwise known as Chancer to other people here, has been running a competition. I wiped it out at one point without him knowing, so he's restarted it. But the competition is for people to guess when we will have 1 petabyte of used storage on the network. And it's a pretty cool little contest because it looks like he's awarding 1,000 SPF for the closest guess. So I would do it. I don't think I qualify, but I would do it if I were you. It's probably one of the few chances you're going to get free SPF. The people that own SPF aren't really too very interested in getting rid of it. So nice little contest, and I would guess you're going to see more and more of those kinds of things going forward. I do want to just talk a little bit about that roadmap, and then I'm going to dive into the launch and the NAB thing that's coming up. This whole idea about fundraising continues to come up, and I know there's some ebb and flow and push and pull on this stuff, but it is what it is, and it will get to where we got to get to, and we'll get there together. But right now we have some capital. We have some funds that we got from the Examiner sell, and from some stuff that happened actually just before the Examiner sell. So I'm in a hiring mode. I'm actually interviewing people right now and bringing people aboard. So that's going to help out a ton. But the whole notion is that we need to sort of get through to a couple of next capital raises. And so one of those capital raises is likely to be on the back of an SPF sale. And I can't really talk too much about it, but we've talked a little bit. And what I can say is that we're looking hard at something called a Reg CF, which is an SEC approved way to distribute assets. As much as I said that would probably be the way that we will do it, I bet it's only a 50-50 shot that that's the way we actually do it. And the reason why I say that is because I think what's really going to happen with SPF is this. I think we're likely to go ahead and spin up SPFs on Solana or Avalanche or, even Ethereum. I'm not sure which layer one we choose, but some other layer one that is that sort of protocol. And then ultimately, once we have those spun up, do a 1-for-1, drop to all the current holders of SPFs, and then burn all the SC prime based SPFs. So then the tokens exist as something out there on these other layer ones. And then the benefit is that we can roll them up on a DEX. We can put them out there on a DEX. And in that environment, you have the ability to be a little bit more, I don't want to say go around the SEC, but it does provide the ability to sort of do things on a more hands-off kind of basis, and in that process, kind of avoid some of those challenges that the regulatory agencies want to put down on things. So that, I would say, probably holds about a 50% chance of being the way it goes. And if we do that, the idea would be that we would make available some 25 to 50 million SPFs to the community at large and to anybody who wants to buy into them and so forth. So just know that that's probably what's coming next in terms of the SCP Corp. I really keep wanting to stave this off, even though there were real benefits in doing a large capital raise last year. The amount of money that venture capitalists were throwing at projects was just stupid, and they were just throwing money at stupid things, and they were throwing money in ways that they didn't even care if they had representation. They just needed participation. It just was not a really great recipe. But now that the Fed and the other central banks are kind of in this new posture, that's starting to dry up. And I think that it's probably good for us, because by the end of the year, when we're ready for an institutional round, it will be a good environment, I think, and we'll be able to show that the product really works and that your network is operating on all cylinders and really pushing hard and doing a great job for us. So I just feel like we are the rebels in crypto. We just aren't doing it like anybody else. And I just really believe that in the end, we're going to be totally validated on taking that path and being totally product centric and product focused versus being, crypto nerd focused and, just trying to gain the hot ball of money as fast as possible, which is not what we're about at all. All right. So I'm going to leave it at this NAB thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. So this NAB thing, there's been a couple little pieces of pushback on whether it's the right show, and you can draw whatever conclusion you want to call, but it's called the National Association of Broadcasters. It's a show that's been running for something like 35 years in Las Vegas. They obviously didn't run the year of COVID, and so that was a big disruption. But what ends up happening is CES runs in January, usually has 120, 140,000 people. NAB follows in April and usually has 90 to 110,000 people show up. It's hard to tell what's going to happen this year. I don't know. What happened at CES this year was, out of a typical 100,000, audience, I think they got something like 50 to 60. So it ended up being, a 40% drop, which, sounds awful. But if you consider where we are with Omicron doing what it was doing, and with everybody kind of like not sure if we're getting back into the swing of things or not, getting 50 to 60% of human traffic is actually pretty good. And if that continues to trend upwards, like I think it will, there's probably every chance that we're going to see 60 to 70% of the foot traffic at NAB, and who knows, maybe even more. I think COVID's over myself. So, it's a thing where I think we're going to see a lot of people show up. And if that's the case, we have a booth that we got lucky on. I mean, I just so lucky. I can't even imagine it. I've been, involved with NAB for years, and I've never seen anything like this, where we got a front of the hall placement, and we got a placement right next to the competitor we're trying to at least somewhat disintermediate, which is just insane. It's absurd. It's almost like, we couldn't have planned it any better than that. So the only downside will be this. So with CES, what happened was, at the last minute, a number of big players backed out. They just pulled out. I think Google, I don't know the names, but I was told that some of the big guys pulled out. AWS, I think on the main exhibitor website is still showing as pending or something like that. It doesn't show their name, but on the exhibitors page, the one I can see, it does show AWS. So it's not clear to me if they've committed fully to the booth. It might be a case where they've locked it up with a deposit, but they haven't yet decided if they're going to take it. If they don't take it, look, we're going to still be there one way or the other. But I think they're going to take it, and I think it's going to be a great show for us. Now, why does that matter to you guys? Well, we'd like to see a lot of you there. Now, I know that this is the East session, so a lot of you guys are, from over in Europe and points East. But it's still a pretty good opportunity because you can usually find pretty reasonable flights to Las Vegas, from almost anywhere in the world. And right now, coming out of the COVID thing, the deals are spectacular. So if you've been under lockdown for a long time and you really are looking for some reason to get away, this could be the one, because essentially what we're going to do is on Saturday night, we're going to hold a small dinner for the shareholders in the corporation. And then on Sunday night, we're going to hold a big party, a blowout. So it depends on how many people RSVP. I'm going to be sending out an email here over the next day. So you should be looking for that. But once you get that email, it will ask you to tell us if you think you're going to come, and if you are, how many people are going to be in your party. So we can then start planning on what we need to go ahead and set up. Do we need to just, rent out one half of the Hard Rock Cafe? Do we need to, rent out the whole top floor of Dries and, get a, really cool DJ in there? Do we need to rent out a big ballroom and, have something like that? I don't know. It's going to depend on how many of you people show up. But the community grew from 1,000 to 10,000 in less than 90 days. So I'm guessing there's going to be a bunch of you people that might be interested in showing up for one of these. And then you can, tell me directly exactly how you feel about, DIY versus examiners and things like that. So we definitely want to see you there if you can make it. If you can't make it to Las Vegas in April, there's every good chance, if Las Vegas turns out to do okay for us, that we'll then take the other media and entertainment show, which is big, which is IBC in Amsterdam, which takes place, I think, in October. So that will be an opportunity for us to come over to that side of the pond and do the same kind of things, where we host some kind of a ballroom or club or whatever we put together to have a bit of a celebration for the community. And we definitely will do that. So look for the email when you get it. Definitely RSVP and tell us if you're going to show up. And we really look forward to meeting all you people, and we really look forward to really growing this product out over the coming year, and as a team and as a group and as a project, and we really want you there. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the questions. Right now I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to quit the Discord really quickly so nobody can ask a question. But usually when I say that, somebody raises their hand, and ultimately then we get into like 90 or 100 questions. So sure enough, one showed up. Got to come to the stage. Got to unmute. Go ahead and ask your question. Coming to the stage, Lead Traveler. Trying to find the coming to the stage button, I guess. Anybody else have a question? I swear my hand is on the terminate end meeting button. $99.69. Come to the stage. We're a little challenged on our come to the stage operation today. All right, well, we'll wait about another 30 seconds. And then if you don't do it, then I'm going to go ahead and close this out here. Oh, no. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
All right, hang on a second. Yes, we can. $99.69. Go
Hi,
ahead.
my name is Hi, my name is Seth. I'm sorry, I'm at work, so I heard most of the meeting, but I was interested in starting an at-home server so I can host some files. For some of us, I'm sure everybody doesn't know, but how many tokens do we need to hold if you want to start a at-home Windows server to store files and participate?
I'm gonna let Henry answer that question if he's still hanging out with us. It's a small number. It really isn't very much. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, so having some initial tokens, it is required, and it kind of serves two purposes. The first one is just kind of a yes or no, and that means that you need to have enough tokens to cover the announcement cost, which is pretty minuscule. Like it's some fraction of a SCP, but it is a non-zero number, so you need to at least have something. And then any amount that you have on top of that serves to act as collateral for your initial contracts. So for that, I'd say you probably want at least something like 30 to 50 SCP, because there are some large contracts going out. Every week I see a couple that are like 20 to 30 big, and you wouldn't want to miss out on one of those. But in general, yeah, you don't need a huge amount. And the amount that you need for collateral is a bit looser and does kind of depend on the rates of storage. But in general, I'd say look at on our main docs page. We do have a collateral page that I think explains things pretty well. And in general, the docs is a great place to go to for any kind of questions, because we've put a lot of time and effort into there to try and explain things plainly, and allow anyone to kind of access the pool of knowledge that we've built.
Okay, thank you for your help. I appreciate that. That's all I had.
Cheers.
Hey, thanks. Hang on a second. Let me. Jeff. Got to unmute, Jeff. On headphone. There it is. Unmute.
Sorry, boss. Who's making pizza?
Okay. What's going on in Pizza Land?
We got the Valentine's Day craziness coming up.
Okay. Fair enough. What's your question? I think we may have lost him. Well, Lead Traveler, you're still there. I'm going to invite these other two guys to speak. Logic Mantra, go ahead.
Hey, how are you? Hi from UK. Just one question. I think, as you said, SCP is required, and I managed to have a basic setup using that. I think the most tedious, I'm a technical guy, so the technical setup of setting and all was not problem. The most tedious part was buying SCP. So I think I have a question that, are you guys planning to list on other exchanges as well to make it easier?
So look, I haven't been shy about this. The whole process with the Examiner started off it started off 2 years ago, but we actually started delivering it in June of last year. And as we were getting going, I just employed, my background, which, was custom configurations and higher end systems, configuration and design and sales. So I built all the Examiners throughout all of, 2021. And then we got crushed in December and, was doing just crazy building. And it's been that way all throughout January as well. So personally, I'm the person who needs to be doing those exchange applications. And I just haven't had time. I just really haven't had time to do much of anything other than service the growth of the community. Now we're finally getting into a place where things are starting to free up. The California integrators taking over. They will start shipping and delivering lots of units. We have a number of other things that are happening in the community that are winding down. And I'm starting to look across my to-do list of all the things that I need to get done that have been put off. And one of the biggest priorities is get us listed on a bigger exchange. The thing about it is that timing's pretty good, right? I mean, if I would done it in December, we probably would have got shot down by some people like Kraken and Bittrex because the volumes just weren't there. But now that we have this big community growth, you know, we went from 1,400 to 10,000 community members over the span of about, 60 days. Now all of a sudden we start to look interesting to people like Bittrex and Kraken. Now we do start to look like we have the capability to get on a bigger exchange. Do we have enough yet to get on Binance and Coinbase? No, I don't think so. I think we're still a ways away from that. KuCoin, Bittrex, Kraken, maybe one or two others that are out there are the ones that I'm primarily focused on. Bigger exchanges that have capabilities that can really handle us. I think that's the next step for us. And then from there, perhaps we end up making the leap to Binance or whoever. But yes, that's a priority, and it's one we're definitely focused on right now. Okay. SWN. I'm going to call you guys two at a time now since we always have this.
Hey.
Go ahead.
There's a slight delay when you say something and then the pop-up shows up for the come to the stage. So apologize if you've already gone over this. I did come in late, but just based on what I've heard on all the previous meetings around where you're at with the XA miners, I hear a combination of trying to slow down the growth of the free space storage on the network. Also, you've got all the issues with supply chain and manufacturing and getting those new XA miners out. I missed the first batch, but I'm on the wait list for the next batch or such. So I'm curious where things stand right now on the future of getting more XA miners out, and then whether it's again based on your storage capacity needs and your plan for that, and then the supply chain side of things.
There's really three things that go into this equation. The first one is that the software needs to be brought a little bit further up the ladder for us to really feel like the XMiner is where it's supposed to be, and that's the 1.0 version we've been talking about. We're on 0.8 right now. The entire population is getting updated to 0.8. And we have a number of features we need to roll in over the next 2 to 6 weeks, and we'll get to that 1.0 launch. And so that's the one of the big things that needs to happen before we just really kind of try and go gangbusters. The second thing is supply chaining. We know right now that it's difficult to get components, but we just passed a milestone that we knew was going to be a hurdle, which was Chinese New Year. That's done. They're going back to work. We think that we're going to start seeing a number of components pop up, and depending on what the channel starts to look like, if I get opportunities to pick up a large quantity of motherboards here or some kind of platform here, then we'll go ahead and do it, and then that will inform whether we open up the ordering again. Then the final thing is just the build out and where we are. I just refuse to put us into this place where we are 5, 8, 10,000 units waiting several months. I feel awful right now that we have 1,000 units that have waited 6 to 7 weeks. I mean, it's just not the way I like to do business. But at the end of the day, they're not getting hurt. The people that are in that group are not getting hurt. And in fact, we've gone out of our way to make sure that they're actually going to do very well. They're going to get some bonuses right away. They're going to get some rebates that they weren't going to get right away. They'll get right away. And more importantly, that trial data isn't really going to start until they're on the network. And we've already said we're going to favor them. So, it's just a thing that we've gone out of our way to make sure that people understand we're going to take care of the examiner population because we believe it's the future. We believe it's the thing going forward. But it doesn't give me the ability to say today exactly when I can open up that wait list. The wait lists are crazy deep. I mean, they're crazy deep. And when we do open them back up, I do have to be cognizant that I don't want to get into a situation. I can see how it works, by the way. I can see how somebody might get into a deal where they end up with 20,000 orders that stretch out 12 months. I just can't allow that to happen. So just be understanding that when we do finally open up ordering, it will only be after I'm fairly certain we can satisfy the orders in at least a reasonable period of time without having to make any kind of crazy concessions. So I know I didn't really answer the question, but I do think we probably will open up ordering again before the April launch. I feel almost certain of that. I just don't know what it looks like. One other thing that plays into it as well, by the way, is that we already know we're going to license the software at some point to other integrators. So down the road, there will be other people making these miners. But the other thing is that we'll be making other miners. So I'm currently now in the process of researching NUCs and small NVMe platforms. I'm researching one use, to be able to do colo work, to be able to buy something that you can easily put into a current existing rack configuration. We have investigated high densities with some of these, 45 drive type devices with, these big host bus adapters that can take, 48 to 60 drives in a single 4U rig. I think those are a little further out for us, but those other platforms, if we come to the table with another order soon, it might be multiple. You might have a choice of the flagship 4U or 4-bay NAS, or a 1U 4-bay or a NUC with, multiple NVMEs inside of it. But I do believe that will happen before NAB. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the 1U rack mount sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's really an interesting one, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, definitely on board with that one. I do have one more question, just small technical question here. I'm looking to set up another node. Currently, all my SCP is tied up with my first one. Am I able to transfer the SCP from node to node, or do I need to go out through South Exchange again and get it out there and then go back into my next one?
Well, it depends on how your settings are set up, and how things are being contracted. I believe you can actually change your settings and drop the number, that you're willing to contract against on your current provider if you have a fair amount locked up today, and then you'll be able to pull some out and move it. Or, like you say, then just go out and buy some more. But I do believe you can actually get some reclaimed just by changing your settings and then waiting for the next contract revision and then get some of that returned. Rhinus would probably be somebody who could answer that a little bit better in the distributed data center channel afterwards about how that actually works mid-contract if you change your max collateral setting down to a lower number. Because that's what you would do, is you change your max collateral from 50 down to 20 or something like that. And that you're not going to get hurt because, it's not like we're going to upload a terabyte of data to you tomorrow. So, it's not like an issue. So, okay.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep. Frequency.
Oh yeah. First up, great content in this meetup. It's really interesting to hear about the relayer and how that's kind of working under the hood and how you guys are working on that. So that's really cool. My question's around, so in the last meetup, you answered a question around people running multiple nodes and what's sensible. And you were saying running two is a good idea, right? If it makes sense, if you're using different hardware, if you're using different disks, all that kind of stuff. 3, maybe more than that, you're starting a farm. I'm kind of looking on Grafana, you kind of see new nodes joining at the moment that are kind of going, number 9, number 10, number 11. And you were saying how in the relayer you can kind of stop that kind of behavior and go, if you're on one IP, then we're just going to treat you as 1 or 2 or 3 nodes. I was just wondering when that feature is going to be released on the relayer, and if you're kind of aiming for that before the big bang in April.
Yeah, there's a big sprint that we have coming up called host selection, which is this whole sort of thing about choosing what the providers that you're going to be using at any given relay or any given customer instance. And, to start with, it'll be pretty rough. I mean, it'll just be a pretty generic, mostly performance oriented, be tied a little bit to some, telemetrics that we have being ingested by the individual relayers themselves. So performance and availability and location, proximity will be the primary early things that will figure into host selection. There will be some things like, if you're under a requirement to store all of your data in a certain geolocation area, EU has these requirements, for instance. We'll probably have some of that baked in by April. There will be probably a couple of other things, in terms of allowing people to choose different data versus parity settings and how durable they want to make it and how much they're willing to spend to kind of, get higher durabilities and or better performance and so forth. So yeah, I think a lot of that will be pretty much ready to go. And in that vein, in choosing durability, I think one of the things that will be very early on in that mix is saying, well, how deep do you want to go into a farm? Because nobody wants a farm. Nobody wants a farm at all. Everybody wants one or two at max from any given farm. And so what ends up happening there is we start off the equation by saying, just don't take any more than one or two from any given subnet. And at least that starts us down the road. And that's not terribly hard to do. Doesn't mean you can't thwart us on that, by the way. You could easily set up a farm on multiple subnets and, then we wouldn't be able to, so quickly dismiss you as a farm. We're going to have to find more intelligence to determine and break out farms. But at the end of the day, farmers still make sense because if there's, 100 relayers out there and, one relayer takes the first two nodes off of a farm, the second relayer might take the second, third and fourth and blah, blah, blah. And so there's still a lot of benefit and value to standing up, lots of storage and instances as long as we're standing up lots of relayers and customers. So that informs why we are continuing to try and tamp down the free space today and why we will continue to try and tamp it down for at least another probably 4 to 6 weeks before we really lift the lid again and say, the time is here. We think we're ready to roll with product marketing and sales. We got a lot of people that have trialed that look like they're going to convert over to real storage. Yeah, it's time. Go ahead and set up your nodes and let's see what happens. So, yeah, I think 1.2 is still the right idea. And if you are a farmer, you really just need to kind of plan on your stuff starting to fill up 3 to 5, 6 to 7 months from now will be when that will really start to take hold, and we'll see multiple relayers throwing up lots of multiple datas.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm not a farmer. I'm running 2 nodes, and I'm only running 2 nodes because they got different storage. So one of them is direct attached storage, and one of them's using iSCSI to a NAS. So yeah, because I'm running 2, and that feels like a sensible place to be in. Being if the NAS goes, I didn't want that on the other node to drag that down, right? So if the NAS goes, then the other node stays up. So kind of being sensible with splitting out, the fault tolerance of the hardware and the nodes you're setting up, right? It seem like a good call.
I think the thing to understand there is that you're not at a disadvantage to anybody else out there. So it's almost like there's a 1-2 network out there right now. Anything above 3 nodes on a subnet really is going to end up being sort of a second, tier of storage, and that everybody in that first and second node class sort of all live on a level playing field. That's really the question you're asking, and that's what I'm confirming right now.
Right.
So yeah.
That makes me feel better. Also, I just want to kind of echo your points on Raspberry Pis, because I know you've probably been getting a lot of grief about people going, why can't I use a Raspberry Pi? Why can't I use it? It's cheap, it's great. They do fail. So I tinker with Raspberry Pis, use them for lots of projects in the past, just for fun, but they do fail. I've set up kind of fault tolerant, 3-tier web farms with load balancers, reverse proxies, web servers, databases, but I put multiple of them in because they're tiny, cheap devices. And I've run some kind of fun stuff on that, and that's great. But they do fail, right? They do fail. And I've had 3 now, three go out of 8. So yeah, for a production storage network, I completely go along with this. Like, do not use that kind of kit. It's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what will end up happening is that people will recognize after, a year or two that, building the most durable and robust configuration they can is really the secret sauce. Because if they don't, and they end up having to tinker and spend a lot of time and extra money to retrofit, and then having downtime that blows up their incentives, and having all the nonsense that happens, I just think that's not going to be a thing. And that's why I also think that the appliance model is really going to prevail in the long run, because we're going to want to, approach people that just don't want to care about being techies or enthusiasts or, even paying attention to this stuff. They just want to put it in a closet, earn some money, and forget about it. And maybe the examiners are there today, maybe they're not, but they will be there as we go forward and as we keep improving the software. And at some point, I really think that the examiner will overtake the DIY in terms of the sheer numbers. Doesn't mean we will give up on DIY. It just means that I think we'll be validated on that idea that people don't want to fuck around with equipment. They just want to set something up and have it run in perpetuity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a DIYer at the moment. I was looking at the examiners, and I'm really interested in the fact you're bringing out you're thinking about the rack mount versions, because that's kind of my cup of tea. So for me now, running stuff on my rack mount kit and stuff is great. It's awesome, part of the project. When I saw the examiner, I was like, that's awesome. Yeah, when it's something I can slot into my rack, I'll be all over that.
Cool. All right, well, stay tuned, because I'm sure we're going to do a 1U rack. It's just a matter of when at this point, not if. So
exactly. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Lead Traveler, you got one last chance. If you don't take it, we're going to close this up. Oh, here he is.
Sorry about that. The pop-up didn't come up.
Shoot your shot.
So I'm DIYer, but interested from a customer standpoint. Had some questions about your sharding. So let's just use small numbers, and let's just assume you have 10 shards, and I want to keep things in an infinite retention, and over time you get churn. So you lose a shard here, lose a shard there. Eventually you lose all your redundancy. So as these shards start going offline, is there a process to start rebuilding them to keep that redundancy?
Right now what's happening is we have 3 major sprints that our core engineers are working on, and one of those is active repairs. And active repairs is the process of watching durability. So if, let's say we just did a, 10 of 30, so that, there were 10 data pieces and 20 parity pieces that are out there. So what's the right number there? So like if one, piece goes offline, that's not enough to actually do a repair, because the durability is still going to be very high, still very much approaching the 11.9s. If 5 go offline, now where are we at? Well, that's a percentage, and we can start to calculate what it looks like against the durability. And what we're going to be doing with our customers is we're going to be preparing an SLA, right? I mean, somebody stands up a relayer and becomes a customer of our service, they're going to get a service level agreement which actually guarantees a certain level of performance and durability. So what that will say is if we fall under, say, 9 nines of durability, then that's when we'll start effectuating repairs, and the active repair process will take hold. And I don't know what that number is on a 10 of 30, but let's say it's somewhere around 7 or 8 providers, lose data shards. Now all of a sudden we have to download the whole data set again, rebuild new shards, upload to another 7 or 8 providers until we get the durability back, and then we're good to go again. Pretty costly thing. So that's going to inform what we ultimately set up as our initial durability ratios. I think what will end up happening, by the way, is, and you guys will like to hear this, we'll probably go heavy-handed for the first 6 months. We'll probably go for more durability and more parity than we need, just because we want to kind of try and limit churn in this first, couple of quarters. And then ultimately, as we kind of see what the churn looks like, then we'll start dropping the numbers a little bit and tailoring that. But yeah, it isn't one provider goes down and we have to, do a repair. It's a percentage of the entire erasure code charting set that has to go down before we start to do it. And we haven't yet established exactly what those numbers are, but that will be set up before we launch the product in April.
The other side of that is it seems like the renter might be a point of contention, because if you were to lose your renter, you lose your database, so you have no way to find your data anymore. What's any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've had quite a few thoughts on that, actually. It's a piece internally that's keeping us awake at night, because you're exactly right. You're sitting there and you've got this database holding all of your key pair shards. If that metadata, if that thing gets destroyed, you cannot access the data on the network anymore. It's completely lost. And so we've talked about snapshotting. We've talked about other kinds of clustering. We've talked about ways for the relayer infra to keep a fresh backup. And so we'll do some traditional stuff. Won't be perfect, but it'll at least get us somewhere up the road to preserving metadata for the renter. Long term, what we really want to see is we want to see that relayer become stateless, where actually we can then upload the data directly to the metadata directly to the network itself, and then recover it very simply, via what was called recover by seed, to where you're able to access a copy of the metadata on the network where the metadata actually lives, and ultimately then have ultimate durability in this world where these relayers are becoming, critical to all the data that's on the network. But yes, it's a very challenging engineering problem. We're deep in the middle of it right now. And I think the way we ultimately solve that will be the thing that ultimately gets us above SME type customers up into enterprise grade customers.
Okay, because I run a Commvault shop, and we're looking at cloud providers right now, probably more March. So that's what my interest is anyway, and we keep an infinite retention on our year-end backups, and I'm in the market for about a half a petabyte. So I would be very interested from a customer standpoint for this project, if nothing else, just trying it out.
You can do that right now. We've got $500 worth of credit, free credit, to try it out. The challenge is I've got about 15 or 16 people that have already registered for trials, and I just haven't turned them on yet. But I'm about ready to pull the lever on that, and so they are going to get turned on. And I think that when we start opening up the trials, we'll open them up pretty rapidly. So if you want, you can definitely get in there right now and qualify for the trial. You get $500 worth of credit. Commvault is compatible. We've used it. We know it works, and I think you like the process. And then this idea of backing up the metadata database, I think for right now it is just a straight snapshotting environment. We'll have some clustering recommendations for people that are bigger installations, but for most people, I think it's going to start out as a snapshotting thing. And then for some people, it's just going to be, that's why I end up using my distributor partner, like Cloud Factory is one we use, because I don't have to screw around with that. I let them handle the metadata backup, and I trust them with everything. So that might be another reason not to want to run a relayer in-house, is if you don't want to have to preserve and take care of your metadata.
Okay, and I find this information where?
Well, to get the trials,
getting on the trial.
To get on the trial, it's just really simple. It's exapro.net/trial.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thank you. All right, guys. Looks like we made it through another one of these. I don't know how it happens every week. We get through them. So I'm really thankful everybody keeps showing up for this. The questions are awesome. You guys are amazing. I think the network's doing really well right now. I think we're starting to get into a level of really leveling off and now really starting to just fly straight forward. And I think it's really going to bode well for our April launch. I think the team is working really hard on doing stuff to make your lives easier. I think we still have some hiccups we have to get over, and we're working through them. But come April, I think we're all going to be in a really good place. And so I'm really grateful to everybody being here, and we'll see you next week on this.